Hello and welcome to this episode of the Australian Property Podcast. Today I'm going to be joined by Amy Lunardi, the wonderful wizard, the buyer's agent that you know from social media, from here, from courses and so on and so forth. Today we're going to be going through some essentials of property, whether you're an investor or just an absolute beginner. We're going to kind of glide our way through 51 need-to-know terms when it comes to interacting with the property market. We're going to talk in more depth about things like the auction process. We're going to talk about the difference between off-market, pre-market. We're going to talk about settlement and so much more. I think I'm going to learn a lot from this episode with Amy because there's some terms in here that I don't really know how to explain. So whether you're new or experienced, you've bought one property, you haven't bought one, or you've bought a lot, I think you'll enjoy this episode here on the Australian Property Podcast featuring Amy Lunardi. Hello and welcome to this episode of the Australian Property Podcast where we're going to be talking about the 101, the essentials, the absolute basics of property, and hopefully not quite everything you need to know, but a lot of it. And I'm joined by Amy Lunardi. Amy, how are you going?
I'm really good. I thought this would be a great episode. I know a lot of our listeners are a bit more sophisticated. They listen to these podcasts all the time. They're very loyal. And so for this episode might not be for a lot of our current listeners, but it also might be because there could be phrases and terms in here where you think, oh, I didn't really know what that truly meant. However, what I think this episode would be great for is if you're listening to this and you know of someone who is just starting out in their property journey, or a friend, a colleague, or your kids who you think should just start learning about property, this is the perfect episode to share with them.
Yeah, absolutely it is. So we've got a heap of terms, probably jargon or words that you've heard us say here on the show before or anywhere else when you speak to a real estate agent or a mortgage broker or anyone around property. And you might be just a little bit unsure exactly what that means. We're going to bust through all of those today. So we're going to spend a little bit of time on each kind of key phrase. The simple one is the first one. Number one is a buyer.
So we're starting off really basic here,
Yes.
But it is important to go into this knowing there's two sides in a property transaction. There's a buyer, and then on the flip side, there's, in different states, they'll call them either the seller or the vendor.
Yep.
So that's bare basics.
Yep. Okay. So I've always wondered about that because I think people new to it would not normally know someone that sells something as a seller, but we call it a vendor, which is quite interesting in property, huh?
Exactly.
So that's number two, is vendor, the person selling the property, and sometimes might not be a person, might be an entity as well. Number three, studio apartment.
Yeah. So I've categorized the next couple of terms just to understand different types of dwellings. And I will also mention I'm based in Victoria, so there's certain ways of describing things in property in Victoria that are different to other states. But just you need to make sure you're familiar in the state that you're in with the different definitions of properties. It's not that important, to be honest, but it's just good when you're talking to agents if you're just able to then explain what you want. So, for example, a studio apartment is most commonly just a single room and a bathroom. There's no actual separate bedroom. So your bed is in your living area, essentially. Yep. And then the next couple that we've got, we're really defining the differences between an apartment, a unit, a townhouse, and a house.
Yep.
Those are my four categories.
Okay.
Might be slightly different.
So it might be slightly different for people, but I would think that a studio apartment is what I'd probably associate with like a student that's come to study, or when I was studying, you'd have just like a big open space, a little kitchenette, lounge / bedroom, and kind of is the same thing. And then, just a bathroom off to the side.
Yeah, exactly right.
So then how does that differ to an apartment, number four?
Yeah, so an apartment here in Victoria is, well, we usually define that as a property which has other properties above or below them. That's just a really basic way to describe it. Some people will call those units as well.
Oh,
so
really?
that phrase is interchangeable.
Okay, I didn't know that. We'll get to that because the unit's next.
Yeah.
So, okay, let's do that. Let's just understand both of those. So what's a unit then? And I've got a question.
Yeah. Well, depending on where you are, a unit might be an apartment. So this is where we've just got to say there's a bit of a grey area. Again, no right or wrong. You've just got to know in your local market what people are calling things. So that when you're asking agents for properties and you're talking to them about it, you know what you're getting. But here I would describe a unit as something which doesn't have anything above or below it, and you've got your own little piece of land under you. You may or may not have a courtyard. So that's my differentiation between an apartment and a unit for me here in Victoria.
That makes sense because like at a courtyard, because that's when I envisage unit, I think of one of those kind of inner city blocks that might have like 3 small dwellings on it, and you might have a little courtyard to yourself. You're kind of on the ground level, so to speak.
Yeah, nothing above or below you. And it could be 1 unit in a block, or it could be 20 units in a block.
Yeah, true.
And then that's another grey one here is townhouse.
Yeah. Yeah, I hear this different people use this phrase all over the country.
Yeah, exactly. For me, again, personally, I'm considering a townhouse as being something along the lines of a unit. In many cases, you're in some kind of body corporate or owner's corporation. You might just have 1 in the block though, or you might have 10 or you might have 20. But for me, the main difference is I would generally say a townhouse is double-storey.
That's what I would say too. Yeah, I imagine like a 2-story thing with a common wall. Not always, but a lot of the times a common wall or like 2 stuck next to each other.
Yeah. And then some people, for example, if there was a townhouse on its own block, you didn't have a body corporate. We're going to explain body corporate later. But some people would then just describe that as a house. And again, there's no right or wrong. Whereas I would describe a house more of a dwelling, a single dwelling on its own block, no shared land. That land could be 200 square meters. It could be 1,000 square meters.
Yeah.
But it's just by itself. No body corporate at all. It could be single or double story. Now, these definitions, again, not super duper important. You'll learn the phrases and lingo once you start searching for properties. But where it starts to come into play a little bit is when you're searching online on realestate.com.au, you can actually
I was going to say that.
Yeah, there's little boxes you can tick in the filter section, unit, apartment, townhouse. I just suggest not using those filters at all, because what you define as a unit or a house, the real estate agent inputting that data might not. So you don't want to cull stuff out just because it's been put in wrong.
Yeah, true.
Or not in the way that you would put it in. And also when it comes to broad property data, if you're doing research or you're an investor, you've got to understand that really there's only 2 categories in property data. There's units and there's houses. But a unit on its own block with land is going to perform, and it's going to be quite different price to an apartment. And then townhouses, sometimes they're lumped into the house category.
Yep.
And then other times they can be put into the unit category. So this is one of the main issues with property data, which you have to be aware of.
Yeah, I always find that, because then there's like detached, semi-detached. There's all these different phrases, and every data provider basically uses a different definition of what actually goes into it. But then, another one is, because I'm always fascinated about trying to find land. On realestate.com.au, they're like rural, they're like, I think there's like farm, and then there's like, there's all these different definitions. I'm like, I don't know which one it is. So would you say, just quickly, if someone is searching for a townhouse /unit /house /whatever, to use bedrooms or some other filter?
I only use the suburb,
yeah.
And I'll use price, and I will have like a broad sort of range either side of the price I'm looking at, just to make sure I'm not missing anything. And then bedrooms in most situations.
Yeah.
So, but I've seen some properties miscategorized before where they've said, it's 2 bedrooms, and I'm like, oh, I would probably count that as 3. Usually agents do the other way around, and they call like a broom cabinet, a broom covered bedroom. But yeah, I would do as minimal filters as possible.
All right. What's this other thing here then? Period home,
yeah. So here in Victoria, and I know that they've got these interstate as well, although not everywhere, is essentially a house that's built circa 100 years ago, and it might be from the Victorian era, Edwardian, it could be Art Deco. So anything that's sort of like we've got pre-war and post-war essentially categories, and then post-war we've got those more they're like those basic brick ones. They've got less character, they've got less detailing. So it's just important to understand in locations where you're looking. If you're talking to agents, you'd be like, and if you say, I want a period home, they'll know what you mean. Okay.
I was looking in with a mate the other day. I was looking at places in Bendigo in regional Victoria, and they have what I would probably characterize as like period style homes.
They do.
A lot of they're kind of like a miniature little townhouse on a small block with the nice like road.
Townhouse or a house?
Well, this is the thing, because they're kind of like those, if they were in Hawthorne, Victoria, or say like Surrey Hills, Sydney, it would be like a townhouse, I guess is what you maybe characterize it as. But out there, they're on their own little block. They got like 300 or 400 square meter block. But are those things called roses that sit under like under the verandas that they have on those old buildings? I don't know what they're called.
The fretwork.
That's the one, yeah. And it's just so beautiful.
It's lovely.
That in Queensland, they have things called Queenslanders.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. So you've covered the period home, Victorian, Edwardian, Art Deco, California bungalow, which I love that style.
Yeah.
So auctions.
All right. In Australia, we've got two methods of sale. A property is either going to auction or it's a private sale. And within the private sale category, there's all different ways of property that can be sold. And these could be various, like it could be off market, it could be pre-market, it could be online. But really, those are the two methods of sale. And if a property is going to auction, a lot of people are probably familiar with a form of an auction, whether it's eBay or anything that just essentially gets sold under competition and people are bidding and the top bidder usually wins the property.
Yep.
So that's relatively straightforward, and auctions have rules.
Yeah.
Whereas private sales don't.
Okay. Yeah.
So some people get scared of auctions and they think, property prices, they're always going to go crazy, because in the media, they're really mostly reporting auction results that are going well over reserve.
Yeah, crazy results, the things that's going to scare you off.
They're not really saying, hey, this private sale property sold for $200,000 more than the asking price. They're not really reported.
Who knows? Yeah. Do you buy, as a buyer's agent, do you buy a lot of properties at auction?
Usually, yes. Interestingly, this year I've been buying mostly off market, which are then private sales.
Yeah. Yeah. Before they even get to the website, which we'll talk about in a sec. Okay. So that's auction. Auctioneers, are they the same as real estate agents?
They are the real estate agents, but they're not necessarily the one that you're going to be dealing with throughout the process of buying.
Okay.
So you might be dealing with John and he's helping you get ready for the auction and giving you the information and showing you through the property. And then on auction day, it might be John, it might be Bob or Karen.
Yeah, just one of the other ones. Yeah.
Yeah. So it just means that you might not have then that rapport with the auctioneer on the day. And if it passes in, they're not necessarily going to have context behind your situation. So just know that before you come into it.
Okay. I've been to a few auctions in my time. I've heard this thing called a reserve price. What's that?
So the reserve price is the vendor's minimum acceptable price that they'll sell during the auction.
Okay.
That reserve price, and it just means that if bidding exceeds that reserve price, the property will sell to the highest bidder.
Is that a legal thing? Or?
Yeah, it's just the rules of an auction.
Right, okay. Because sometimes
you can't necessarily ever force someone to sign once it's all done and dusted, but that is the generally accepted rule.
Because I always hear this thing like sometimes this is the next thing that we're going to say, on the market. So when I've been there, they start bidding, they've thrown out numbers, the auctioneer's like got a bit of paper in their hand, pointing at people, and then they go, all right, now it's on the market.
Yeah, and everyone's going to have a different phrase at an auction in how they declare that the reserve has been met.
Okay.
So there's no standard phrase, but commonly here in Victoria, you'll hear the words, we are now on the market. Or you might hear something like, we've hit reserve, we're playing for keeps.
Sometimes what they say? We're playing for keeps.
Sometimes.
Oh, right. Okay.
Sometimes, though, it's not clear, because when it's like a really quick auction, sometimes I've seen auctioneers who have forgotten to say, we've hit the reserve, we're selling. And in some cases, I'll ask, hey, are we on the market? Have we met the reserve price? Because it's important for you to know that when you're bidding. So understanding the terminology there, but the reserve price can change. It can change the vendor, the price that they want at the start of a campaign could be different to the price they want just before they do the auction. They're allowed to change the reserve during the auction, Owen.
Ah.
Yep.
Because yes, okay.
They're allowed to say, they might have instructions to that auctioneer to say, at X price, come into me and seek instructions from me. Or they might have a floating reserve where they say, if you've got competitive bidding, this is my reserve. But if no one's bidding or you've only got one strong buyer, come into me and we'll talk about it. There's a lot of strategy around reserve price. And some of the vendors say, well, if anything over $1 million, don't even come and ask me, but just sell it.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, but you need to know that as a buyer. So
if I'm buying from it's your house and I don't know who you are because you're sitting inside the house, I'm outside trying to bid on this thing. Do I know the reserve price as a bidder?
No.
Right. Okay. So
Sometimes you might. Sometimes you might in cases where you might have seen a property advertised and it says reserve is X.
right.
And that's a marketing strategy sometimes where that property has to sell or the vendor's happy to disclose it and they're like, anything over that I'm happy about. And sometimes I will ask the agent directly, what's the reserve going to be? Where are the vendor's expectations? Are they within the quote range? No, I don't always do that. It's discretionary. There's a lot of different scenarios happening here, but you don't always know that in the same way that agent doesn't always know your budget. There's cards that need to be kept close to chests on both sides in property. It's not always the case, but in many situations, you don't want to completely show where you're at from both a vendor and a buyer side. That's why it's really hard, because sometimes I have people say to me, well, wouldn't it just be easier if the quote range, the reserve had to be like mandatory legally at the top?
Yeah.
I'm like, well, that'd be great if that was enforceable, but that then removes the vendor's right to have discretion around it, in the same way that you're not obliged to disclose your top budget when you're going into these things. It's really hard.
Yeah. So that's on the market, but then there's another thing called passed in.
Mm-hmm.
I've been at an auction. I remember a beautiful place up in the Dandenong Ranges in Victoria. Absolutely beautiful place. Probably a period home is what you describe it, but it was on land. What does that mean? Passed in? Yeah.
A pass in occurs when bidding hasn't reached the reserve or hasn't exceeded the reserve.
Okay. So if I'm the seller, $1 million, and the bidding gets to $950.
Exactly.
Right.
So then it will pass in. In other words, it just becomes a private negotiation.
Yeah, because they normally walk inside and there's a different discussion, right?
Yeah, and it'll pass in. The rules are it passes into the highest bidder if there was a bidder. So if you've bid $950, passes into you, you have the exclusive right to then go and negotiate with the vendor. And if you can't reach a result, then that agent can go out to other people who are bidding, or it just becomes a private sale.
Yep. Okay, so it's just
becomes a free-for-all from there.
Passed in. I wonder where that phrase comes from. Passed in.
We should find out.
Maybe it goes in. Because I always see it at auctions as people like go inside and have a private discussion. So maybe it's passed in. Unconditional. What does that mean at auction?
Okay. Well, let's define conditional versus unconditional. So an unconditional contract or an unconditional offer, same thing, means that you aren't subject to anything happening. You've got no out clause. So if you are conditional upon something, the most common conditions, and this is also interchangeably used with the phrase subject to. It's the same thing. Conditional upon or subject to means the same thing. It's usually finance or a building inspection. Could technically be anything, Owen. It could be subject to your cat liking the property. You wouldn't do that,
important.
But technically it could be. And it means that if those conditions are not fulfilled, and there's always a date in those conditions, then you have the right to exit that contract with your deposit returned.
Yeah.
So it's a safety clause. And when you're in a private sale situation, you can have your offer subject to anything. Being conditional upon stuff, anything, reduces the strength of your offer because it's introducing risk to the vendor because they've got the chance of you walking away and for reasons beyond their control.
The building inspection didn't pass or something.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Whereas an unconditional offer, now you might have a cooling off period if it's a private sale or if it's X days prior to auction, depending on where you are. But if you're bidding at auction, that contract is completely unconditional with no cooling off period. And therefore, if you're successful, then you've got no out clause. You can't be subject to finance or a building inspection. Unless that property passes into you, you can actually negotiate those conditions in. They're probably not going to be excited about saying yes to that, but technically you can. But you never bid on the basis of assuming you're going to get those conditions in.
So you're bidding at an auction for one of your clients. I'm the seller. I want $1 million. You get to $950. Then you go into the negotiation room and you're like, okay, we can get to $1 million if or subject to these two things.
Yeah, you are allowed to put it in at that point in time. Or if you're going along to an auction and you're not ready to buy that property, so you don't bid at all, and then all of a sudden it passes in. Actually want this property, but I don't have my finance yet. Well, then that's your opportunity. But you can never go into an auction expecting to bid with conditions. So you've got to do your due diligence up front.
Okay. Private sale?
Yeah, so private sale, we did talk about that briefly earlier. It's just not an auction. And private sales, no rules. Every agency has their own rules. Sometimes agents within agencies have different rules to each other. Sometimes that agent's rules will depend on what the vendor wants to do.
Okay. Interesting.
It's
all fun. It's all fun and games. Yeah,
so
right.
The way that you figure out what the rules are is you have to ask 1,000 questions. So you always, before you submit any offer, you have to say, what is your offer process? What are the timeframes involved? Are you going to be disclosing offers? How are you going to handle competition? Will I get another shot? Will it just be a one offer that I get and I don't know about anyone else's offers? Is it going to be transparent? It's on you to ask all of these questions until the point where you're comfortable to know, okay, this is how it's going to play out.
A lot of people do actually say that. They're like, if you ask 5 people how they bought their property, I'm sure 5 people come back with a different experience around this. Because it is, like, some agents don't tell you anything. And then you don't know, are they legally allowed to say that? Are they not? Like, I just assume that
and
it's
that
no rules kind of thing.
Yeah. And then sometimes buyers will say to me, I've got burnt by that real estate agent. I got played around. And once I ask them questions, I realize they just didn't ask the right questions of the agent. And we've got to remember too, often agents forget what buyers don't know because they're doing it every day. Sometimes they forget to tell the buyers, this is how it's going to happen. So it's on you really to ask all of those questions.
Best and highest. What does that mean? I feel like I've heard this at an auction.
What do you reckon it means, Owen?
I feel like it's the offer at an auction.
No.
No?
Nope. So best and highest is a common private sale method.
So it'd be like best meaning that, like, if it's not subject to any conditions.
Well, no, if I said to you, Owen, you've just got to give me your best and highest offer.
Right. Okay.
So there's two, break that down to, like, the highest offer is obviously price related, but best can relate to terms.
Yeah.
So give me your best offer, Owen. It might be $1 million, but you're subject to finance and subject to a building inspection. Whereas someone else's best offer might be $1 million, no conditions.
Yeah.
Well, as a vendor, which one am I going to choose? You need to find out what the process is, because with best and highest, in a lot of cases, they're not going to call you back if they get a higher offer, even if it's $1,000, because you've said that's my best and highest. But this is why you have to ask, because sometimes an agent might call the first person back. So the first person who gives them an acceptable offer. When I say acceptable offer, that's an offer which the vendor would accept in the absence of competition. So they might call the first person back as like a last right of refusal, or they might call no one back, or they might say, we'll get all the best and finals and then we'll sit down with the vendor and then we'll decide what we're going to do. Well, that's annoying, isn't it?
Yeah.
Because that's opening up, you know, the opportunity that other people are going to get, or you're going to get a second chance, and therefore it's really not best and highest.
Does the real estate agent have to take an offer to the vendor, to the seller?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, they do. They need to communicate offers to the vendor. I mean, there can be times where a vendor has said to an agent, do not bring me offers. I don't want to see them unless they're over X.
Yeah, okay.
Or
so they can act, the agents can act on the instruction, but in other cases, it's normally they take them to the, because that's one of the things I think a lot of people get confused about is like, did the seller even know that I made an offer kind of thing? And that type of question.
Yeah. And there's other ways of private sales, like you might see something called an expressions of interest or a private tender. And essentially these are just names for private sale methods, but every agency will run an expressions of offer differently too.
Yeah.
There's not like rules around that. So in some situations, it just allows them to have at least a deadline on a private sale. So you might see something saying expressions of offer by the 9th of September, just allows them to have that end date to put pressure on buyers to just not indefinitely wait.
Their best and highest offer ready to go.
Yeah. Property could sell before that though. So then you've got to ask, well, could it sell before? They might say, no, we're not even considering offers till that date. Or they might say, yeah, if we get a great offer beforehand, we'll accept it. So it's on you to ask all these questions.
Cooling off period. I know you have a Victorian experience here, but there are some rules in other states. I'm familiar with the general term, but what does it mean for a property buyer?
Cooling off is a change of mind period where you can exit that contract. And depending on which state you are in, you will have X days. Some states have no cooling off. Otherwise, you, for example, in Victoria, if it's a private sale, you've got 3 business days from the date that you as a buyer sign that contract to cool off.
Okay.
So that's important to understand. You as a buyer, 3 business days.
But I've often wondered this. Does that that doesn't apply at auction?
There's no cooling off at auctions.
Does it apply in an unconditional offer?
It does if it's a private sale.
Okay. Right.
It doesn't apply if in Victoria you buy within 3 business days before or after auction 2. So there's a lot of rules around this, Owen. But a cooling off is not applicable if you've submitted an offer on a contract and the vendor hasn't signed yet. You just withdraw your offer in that case. Cooling off is applicable. Just say, Owen, I give you an offer today in writing. You sign it as a vendor. I've got 3 business days to cool off after that. But there is a penalty involved. So 0.2% in Victoria of the purchase price. It depends on where you are interstate as to what that thing is. So there's a fee involved. And you never want to go into a contract expecting to cool off, but you just need to understand that that is a right. And that's why auctions are all the more reason why you've got to be confident, because you don't have that opportunity. And that's why a vendor's like selling at auction too, removes all risk for them, with the buyer pulling out.
Yeah. Yeah, it's perfect environment for them. Okay, so there's no cooling off around auctions. These next ones are actually going to be important.
Oh, and I think interstate, you can waive your cooling off rights. Victoria, you can't.
Oh, okay, cool. Off market. So this is for where properties are for sale but not advertised online. I feel like this is more common now. You mentioned before that you're buying a lot off market this year. Mm-hmm. Can you explain what this means?
Yep. So we've got domain.com.au, realestate.com.au, various other online platforms where people can pay a lot of money. It costs a lot to advertise online to sell a property. Alternatively, they can sell it not online through a local real estate agent, and they're reliant on that agent finding a buyer for them. And the agents have got their database, they've got advocates they work with, ways to get buyers. It's actually technically harder for an agent to sell off market because you don't have the exposure. So there's pros and cons of selling online or off market. But as a buyer, it's really important to understand that this market exists. It's big. We've bought 80% of our properties this winter for clients off market.
Oh, wow.
That is way more than normal. Normally it's like 30, 40%. But if you're not accessing the off market, it's like going to the grocery store and you can't go into half the shop.
Yeah.
So it gives you more opportunity. Off markets can be great in that sometimes they're a win-win, good price, sometimes cheaper, sometimes not. But other times they can be a waste of time. The vendor's not motivated. They haven't paid any money for marketing. They haven't committed to a deadline. They might not even have a contract. They might be working with multiple agents. So there's a lot around off markets. Go and listen to that off market episode that Chris and I did recently where we delved into it all. I think it was with Chris or Pete.
Might have been Pete. I think it was Pete.
Yes. So there's a lot happening in that off-market market. It's the dark web of the property market.
Okay, dark web, yeah. But good things can be there as well.
Yeah.
Pre-market then. So if off-market's like, maybe it's like you have a connection with a real estate agent or something like this and you get those properties available. What does pre-market mean?
A pre-market is a property that is going to go online at some point in time, and you need to understand the difference between pre and off, because an agent might say, hey, Owen, this property is off market, but the reality is it might be pre-market and go online in 3 days. And then you think, oh, exciting, get exclusive opportunity here. And then you dilly-dally and then it's online.
And then it's too late, then there's multiple buyers.
Yeah. So pre-market, I always ask an agent when they say this off market, is it off market or is it pre-market? If it's pre-market, when is it going online? And would they genuinely sell pre-market?
Yep. Yeah, makes sense. That's actually how we bought our house. It was a combination of off/pre-market. It was off-market when we heard about it, thanks to the real estate agent, but then it went on for 1 day, but we'd already bought it by like midday that day.
There you go.
So they had one person through, I think. Settlement.
Settlement is the day you get the keys. The day it's officially transferred into your name, becomes your property.
Okay.
When I started working out in real estate, everyone kept talking about the word settlement. I was like, I don't know what that means. And I just pretended I know what it meant. But when you buy a property, you don't get it straight away. Usually there's a minimum of 30 days because there's all this paperwork and stuff that has to happen in the background. Your loan needs to get ready. Yep. So it could be 30 days, 60 days, 90 days, 120. It could be 47 days. It could be 320 days. It can be anything.
Yep.
But in that time period, you don't own the property yet.
Yep.
You're not paying a mortgage yet.
Yeah. So, okay. And sometimes that can be one of the bargaining tools that people have is like longer or shorter settlements. If you're buying, what does the seller want?
Absolutely. So that's a term that can be used to your advantage. If that vendor hasn't bought yet, they might want a longer settlement. If they've bought or they're desperate for the money, a shorter settlement will be appealing. And sometimes settlement can trump price.
What's the longest settlement you've ever seen?
Well, off the plan, settlements are often quite long. If the property hasn't been built yet, we haven't talked about off the plan yet, but they could be years and years away.
But for an existing home?
The longest I've probably done would have been 6 months. We try not to do more than 90, 120 days because your pre-approval expires in that time period.
Yeah.
So you're introducing a bit of risk to the buyer. But we have recently done quite a lot where we've done a 90-day settlement and then allowed the vendor to stay in that property under essentially a license agreement. It's kind of like a rent back for a couple months.
Yeah, that's what I've seen a lot.
Yeah. It means that we can settle. We've reduced the risk of our financial situation changing. Vendor stays in there. There's a legal agreement in place. And then it's a win-win for those situations where the vendor hasn't bought and they're not. This is what I've done with a lot of off-markets recently where the agent's like, oh, the vendor's not quite sure. I'm like, what about this scenario? Like, oh, yeah, that'd be great.
Yeah. Cool. Contract of sale.
Yeah. So when we buy something, when we go on a new phone plan, Owen, you get a contract you have to sign. Do you read that contract? You probably don't.
No, but I would read a property one.
Yeah, you would. Exactly. But you don't have to read a contract when you sign it. You get your legal representative to read it for you. And there's there's like a standard form contract, but they're not necessarily, solicitors don't necessarily have to use them. They create their own. And within that contract, there's general conditions, which are applicable to, the common contract, and they're very common. Otherwise, we've got special conditions, which the vendor's solicitor will add in, and they're usually in favour of the vendor. Okay. So you need to know that as a buyer. Sometimes your legal representative might say, I want that special condition removed, or you need to understand the implications of this.
Yep. And
then in that contract, you're going to have the price, the settlement, terms, conditions, the particulars of that property, like the title number, all of that, basic information. And every state has a contract of sale, which you're going to have to sign. But then on top of that, we have extra documents of disclosure, which vary state to state. Victoria is very thorough. We have something called a Section 32, which has to be provided to you as a buyer. And it contains certain documents in there which you need to know about. But in other states, they're not necessarily obliged to provide those extra documents. So it's on you as a buyer to source them yourself or request them.
Kind of a bit more buyer beware.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, so Section 32 in Victoria, vendor statement, that type of thing. You did mention something before, which is legal representative. And in Victoria, we most commonly call these people conveyancers. It's a term used in some parts of the country as well.
Well, conveyancing is the process of the transfer of the ownership of the property. You need to have someone doing the conveyancing for you. I mean, maybe you could do it yourself. I wouldn't advise it.
Yeah. But
otherwise, you're going to have someone, let's call it your legal representative, doing the conveyancing for you, doing all of that paperwork and what's done online these days in the background to transfer that property to you. And ideally to review that contract of sale as well. It might be a conveyancer who just specialises in doing that, or it might be a solicitor who is able to do conveyancing as well. So either or.
Yep. So conveyancer as the title, or lawyer making an offer.
Yeah. An agent says to you, hey Owen, you want to buy this property? Make an offer. Okay. But a lot of the time buyers are like, well, how do I do that?
Yeah.
So
how do you do it in practical terms?
Yeah, what is an offer? Well, an offer is your price and your terms and your conditions. Price is obvious. Terms would be like your settlement, when you're going to pay the deposit, how much deposit, etc. And then your conditions, like you're subject to finance or building inspection, or you might be changing special conditions, etc. And then you need to understand, well, am I doing that on a contract? Am I just sending an email? Am I sending a text?
Yep.
Talking, like, you need to ask the agent what form that offer comes in at what point.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I was often confused about this. I was like, do I just text the number? Do I call them, email?
And some agents have like a separate piece of paper you fill in.
Yeah, they do. Yeah. An executed contract is when both parties have signed. That makes a lot of sense. Sometimes I feel like, Amy, there's a step between like making an offer and an offer acceptance and the actual formal document. I feel like, I don't know if this is just I'm hallucinating, but I feel like when we bought our first home, there was we paid like $1,000, not like a deposit, but like it was
a holding deposit.
Like a holding deposit.
Yeah, every agent will have a different process around it.
Okay.
Sometimes they'll say you have to give a holding deposit with your offer. Most of the time where I buy, they don't.
Okay.
They just require that once you've signed.
Okay.
But yeah, it could be a case of you just sending an email to start with and they say, we'll document it once it's acceptable, or we'll document it once we get closer, or whatever it is. But this is why, again, you ask in what form that offer comes in, when it needs to come in writing. But you can't pop the champagne until the vendor signs.
Okay.
When the vendor signs, they are locked in. You as a buyer might have a cooling off or conditions, but you cannot celebrate until the vendor signs. And if the vendor signs it but changes something like the price, that's not then a binding offer until you initial it. If you accept that new price, that's a counter offer.
Yeah, okay. We did cover subject to conditional upon before, but you did mention something before which is subject to lease. That's probably just worth calling out separately. So you mentioned this, like if I'm selling my house to you, I might say, yeah, but Amy, I'm not ready to move out yet. Could I lease it from you? Is that what this is?
Subject to lease is when there's an existing tenant in place.
Okay.
And you need to know that if you're buying it in case that fixed term lease ends after settlement, and in which case you're going to become a landlord for a period of time, you'll inherit that tenant. You can't force a tenant to move out before the end of a fixed term lease.
Right.
But if that property is subject to lease, you need to ensure, and that tenant's leases say a month to month, and you want to move in, you need to make sure that it's documented that you're getting vacant possession. So the tenant will move out before that. Okay. And then what we were just speaking about before, if you're offering the vendor to stay back, you might be including that as a special condition to say this is what's going to be happening. Yep. Or you might negotiate that on settlement. That's the vendor's risk then.
Okay. So this is the deposit thing before. We've got two things on this, which is the deposit that goes to the agent, which typically into a trust account, is my understanding. And then there's the bank deposit versus the agent deposit. What's the difference?
Yeah, I think for first home buyers, and when I was starting out, I was a bit confused by this too, because with a deposit which you give to the agent, which is held in a safe place called a trust account, that's sometimes a different amount to the deposit you're contributing towards your loan, towards the bank. So in Victoria, the most common deposit is 10%. We don't usually do over that.
This is to the agent.
To the agent, but it might be less. It might be 5%, might be 7%, whatever you negotiate, or it might be $5,000 now, balance of 10% in a week, or on unconditional. And you might then be contributing 20% towards your loan. In other words, that extra 10% gets reconciled at settlement. That's when you provide that extra.
Yep.
Or if the agent, and this is where it's important to know, if the agent needs a 10% deposit and you're buying on a 5% loan, or with a parent guarantor where you're not contributing any deposit, you still have to front that cash at the start.
Yeah, so you need
to sort that out.
You need to know if the agent needs 10%, you've only got 5% deposit, like cash available. Yeah, it's really, really important to understand. So who would they would ask the agent, ask their conveyancer, or ask their
You'd ask
broker,
the agent.
or?
Each property, each vendor is going to have a different tolerance towards accepting a lower deposit. So if you're interested in a property and you've got a 5%, you can't come up with it anymore. You have to say to the agent, would the vendor accept this? This is the reason why I've only got 5%. I've got a pre-approval in place.
Yeah.
Most cases they will, but there are situations I've been in where there's been deceased estates or mortgagees involved and they needed 10%.
Okay. LVR stands for loan to value ratio. We've talked about this a lot. What is it and why does it matter?
So LVR is just something which is more going to come up when you're talking to your mortgage broker or your bank. So let's just use round numbers. You want to spend $1 million on a property and you're borrowing $800,000.
Yep.
Your LVR is 80%.
Okay. So
your loan to value ratio is 80%. Or if you're borrowing $900,000, it's 90%.
Okay.
So your deposit is 10%.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's another one that says loan to value ratio, but then there's land
Land to asset ratio.
Yeah, land to asset ratio, which is another one.
Totally different.
Totally different. Yeah, we'll cover that another time. Stamp duty.
Stamp duty is a fun tax that we pay on settlement.
Oh, yeah.
And it can really vary depending on which state you're in. In Victoria, it's around 5%, for example. But as a first home buyer, depending on the purchase price, you might pay no stamp duty or less stamp duty. So if you're listening to this podcast, you haven't even spoken to a broker yet, just Google stamp duty calculator and the state you're in, and you can plug all of the metrics in and it'll show you the stamp duty that's payable. That is a cash payment that you're paying on settlement. Sometimes it might be borrowed. If you're borrowing more than your entire loan, you're an investor or guarantor loan or something, you can sometimes borrow it. But in a lot of cases, it's a cash payment.
This gets a lot of first home buyers because it's a cost that you have to pay. If even so, there might be incentives, but you might be paying over the range, which allows you to get no stamp duty. You might have to pay more than that. So
that's right.
All of a sudden, you get stamp duty as well, which can be pretty brutal. Like we were looking at a place the other day. It wasn't very expensive, but the stamp duty was like 20 grand.
Yeah.
Which for first home buyers is pretty significant.
Oh, yeah.
Land tax is another absolutely wonderful, blessed thing
taxes,
that we get.
Don't we?
We get given, particularly here in Victoria, we get quite a fair bit of this. So land tax.
Land tax as an investor is a tax that you have to pay on an annual basis. For the privilege of owning an investment property, it's calculated based on the land value, and different states have different ways of calculating that, but it's applicable to investors. Until the start of this year or last year, I've lost track of time, but until recently, when you settled as a purchaser, even if you were moving in, you had to pay the rest of that year's land tax. If it was an investor, you don't have to do that anymore here in Victoria.
They've tried to do a few different things with land tax and stamp duty together in different states, just to try and make it better or worse.
It hasn't worked out, has
it? No, it hasn't. Council rates is another thing that you'll pay.
Yeah.
Which is normally based on the value, the council's estimated value of your property, right?
Yeah. So on your rates notice, there'll be a CIVA, capital improved value, on that. That does not relate to how much your property is worth.
Yeah.
Sometimes people say, well, it only says $1 million on the rates notice and they're quoting up to 1.2, and why should I pay? It's not relevant to that, but that's what calculates your rates. And as a renter or living with your parents, you don't have to worry about these bills, but once you settle, you have to pay these rates every year. Council rates, water rates as well.
Yeah,
when
water rates.
Buy a property, depending on what state you're in, you'll get given this information, or you can find out. You just request it from the vendor to know how much you're up for. And on settlement, it gets adjusted. For example, if the vendor is prepaid rates till the end of the year, you pay them back essentially, and vice versa.
Yeah. I believe this covers my bins, my local bin pickup, which is pretty good. But if you want an extra bin, you do have to pay a little bit more. So we did do that this year. A lot of nappies, unfortunately.
Imagine if it only covered bins.
Yeah. I still think that
there's other services apparently council provide.
They make you pay for your own footpath. Like there's a lot of stuff going on. I don't know what it covers. But anyway, covenant, restriction on land use, which is a good one, and easement. These are two things that in here in Victoria you get the Section 32, which can help with some things, but in other states you probably need to do some investigation.
Yeah. So these are legal terms. Covenant is a restriction on land use in some way. So one example of a covenant might be to say you can only build one dwelling on this block.
Yeah.
And to remove that, it's actually quite onerous, time-consuming, lengthy. You've got to go to court. And it's relevant if you are buying a property and you want to knock it over and subdivide it. Well, that's going to be a problem for you. A covenant could also be, there's really old ones that still exist, like you can't quarry this land anymore, Owen. Like, okay, no problem. But it's some kind of restriction.
Wasn't thinking of it.
Yeah. Or in some situations it might be more of a, like, not necessarily covenant, but an agreement where you can only build, and this is quite often in house and land areas, where you can't go and paint your house purple.
Yeah.
Like there's character guidelines that you have to abide by. So that's separate to something that was introduced 100 years ago that's not applicable. But you just need to know, like, if you're buying this property, what are the legal restrictions on it? And then an easement is essentially allowing others, others right to access or use part of that land if required, which sounds like someone can just walk onto your house at any point in time. It's not, like that.
Yeah.
It's usually something like there's a sewage pipe under the ground there, and you're not allowed to build anything over the top of it, because if there was a blockage there or if they needed access, the water authority had to come in and fix it. They have the right to do so. So you can build over an easement with permission, but there is also something called a right-of-way easement too. So if you've got a shared driveway with someone else, in a lot of cases there'll be an easement to say, well, you're both allowed to use this. You can't prevent each other from using it.
Yeah.
One time, though, I saw this property where they had an easement along the back fence which allowed the neighbour to walk through the backyard to get to their backyard.
Oh.
And that was, for my client, a deal breaker. It was unlikely anyone was going to use it, because who wants to be going into other people's yards? But it was there from however long ago it was put on.
You know, there's that cliff walk on the Mornington Peninsula, the Millionaire's Walk.
Yeah.
They're beautiful, magnificent houses on the cliff here in Victoria, down at Sorrento. But you can just walk through
their front yards.
Yeah. And you're like, you're looking at these houses.
You're straight into their living
you're walking
room.
at these amazing houses. Anyone listening to this can Google Millionaire's Walk, Sorrento.
Yeah.
It's beautiful. But I remember you also had that weird revenge strip thing. We did an episode not too long ago where Amy was, I think you were renovating or building subdividing. And there was this like patch of land that was like 30 centimeters wide and covered like your back.
It was between our property and the laneway behind us, and it was owned by someone from 100 years ago, but we had to essentially get rid of it or absorb it into the council land before we could use that laneway.
Which is 30 centimeters blocking
that access. Yeah, you've got to get legal reviews with all of this. I would not expect anyone to ever interpret something. Please don't go to an auction. Please don't ever submit an offer without getting a conveyancer to review this for you. And you also, when you need to give your legal rep context too, you need to say to them, this is my intention with the land. This property has been recently renovated. It's had an extension. I'm expecting
there's
it to come with
a new shed on here or something like that. Yeah,
because they'll provide you information, but they're not going to know if something's built over an easement.
Yeah, exactly. You did mention this name earlier on. This is probably one of the big ones that confuses people from different states. Body Corp / Owners Corporation / there's another name for it. It stays a strata.
Strata. It's the same thing. Yeah. So if you are buying into a block, it might be an apartment block or a unit block. Here in Victoria, for example, anything more than 2 in a block has to have an Owners Corporation or Body Corporate. Same thing. Mm-hmm. They might not do anything. In other words, if there's only 3 in the block and really there's nothing to manage, then there might be what's called an inactive Owners Corporation. Nothing has happened. No one collects fees. It's just there might be a shared insurance policy.
Yep.
Otherwise, of course, when you've got bigger blocks with common property to manage and multiple owners, the body corporate or the Owners Corporation is in many cases a third-party company who specialise in managing this. But it could be one owner in a small block who says, I'm happy to be the body corporate manager. I'll handle it all. They have to comply with certain rules, etc. So it's a bit onerous. But a lot of people's you've got the Owners Corporation manager, body corporate manager, but the Owners Corporation itself, the body corporate itself is the collective of the owners in that block. They're
the ones that make the decisions.
They're the ones that make decisions. It's a democracy. They have voting rights. They all have to agree on stuff. There's rules around all of that. So a lot of people say, well, the body corporate's not letting me do this. I'm like, well, that's the rules that are imposed by all the owners. Like, be involved in your meetings and talk to people, and things can change. Also, if you don't like your body corporate manager, do what I did and organise a coup and overthrow them and get someone else. I did that in one of our blocks. But when you're in a block when there's 100 apartments,
it's hard.
Well, you're one voice of 100 in comparison to one of 4 or 8 where you're going to have a bigger say in things.
Yeah. Those bigger blocks and the developers, I don't want to say they do this, but they might retain ownership for a certain period of time so that it makes it harder to do things in the body corp.
Yeah, or they'll have contracts too as well in place to say this is how long we're managing it for. Yeah.
Common property is kind of like what we mentioned before, where the person was walking through the backyard, but a bit different.
Yeah, so common property is shared spaces. So this could be The driveway is a shared space. Multiple people have to access it. Could be the foyer, gyms, lift, pools, essentially anything that's not within your own title or unit or apartment. And that's what needs to be managed by the body corporate manager.
Yep. Title, so sometimes referred to as the legal title, is, and then we hear things like title office. What does that mean?
Yeah, well, the title is used to be a piece of paper that you own. It's now electronic these days to say like this is exactly what you own. But it's also when it comes into context for buying a property, you need to understand what's on your title. What are you buying exactly? For example, you might expect to have the courtyard on your title. It looks like it's within your fence line, but in reality, it's common property.
Yeah.
Or you might expect to get that car park over there or 2 car parks, but then you check the contract and that's not your car park on title. There's no car park on title. Sometimes they might be within your title, within your lot boundaries, or it might be a separate title that comes with your property. Like a car park is a separate title, but it's both in the contract. I've had plenty of times where I will always read a contract before I send it to solicitor, just in case I can see something glaring. And sometimes I'll say, there's no car park title in here. And I'll get it from the agent before I bother sending it to the solicitor. So, you need to understand what you're buying. Courtyard thing is a big thing. If it's not on your title, it might be on something like a lease, like a 99-year lease.
Interesting.
Or it might be common property. The fences might have been up for 40 years. The risk of someone taking down the fence is very low, but not zero. Okay.
OC rules. Is this owners
body
corporation?
Corporate, body corporate rules, OC rules. There can be bylaws within that owners corporation. If they're not in the contract, request them, get your hands on them to understand what's in there. There might be rules around the times you can move in or out, or the rules around permission you need for certain renovations and noise and what you can and can't do to the outside of the property. Pets is a bit of a grey area. Like you can't really enforce no pets, but then if they're causing a nuisance, you can't really stop it.
Because there was like a thing a few years ago about like renters getting access to pets as well, because then that's under the rental laws, so many different
But
interplay.
even if it's not enforceable, if it's in there, you know that maybe you're buying into a body corporate which is not pro-pet, which causes the other issue, just read through it.
Yeah, then you got to resell it because you can get access as a buyer to the minutes and all those types of things too, right?
Yeah, there's be an owner's corporation or strata certificate. Here in Victoria, there'll be that certificate. There'll also be minutes of the last general meeting. I like to request minutes from the last few years too. It gives you more info, and then the rules as well.
Okay.
And then as a buyer, I would always encourage you to try, it's not always possible, but try and speak to the body corporate manager to ask any extra questions. We like to say, has there been any historical issues with the block? Is there any future plans that have not been recorded in these minutes that have been discussed? Just to get, and sometimes we get information from those calls that are deal breakers.
Things like there's a major plumbing issue with the building and...
Yeah, or it might have had, there might have been talks about roof replacement, but that was talked about 3 years ago, so it's not in the most recent minutes, but it probably will happen.
Yeah.
And I had one crazy one once where by talking to the owners corporation manager, I found out that there was a $25,000 premium on any water related insurance claims, because they'd had so many claims in the past around that. That wasn't noted anywhere in the minutes. But if your washing machine leaked and, damaged your whole house, you're up for a $25,000 premium.
Yeah.
That was a deal breaker for us.
Yeah. And this is for people that are buying for the first time. This applies to you if you become an owner. So...
And sometimes you will find that they might not talk to you. Then I want to get answers via the real estate agent. I want to make sure they're in writing, not just the agent telling me the answers or the vendor.
Yeah.
And if you're in New South Wales, I believe there's strata searches that you can pay to do certain due diligence for you. So just understand it's on you to try and do as much as you can. You might hit a roadblock, but at least you've tried.
So I've only got a few more left. Off the plan. So what does that mean?
Yeah. So off the plan, in a lot of scenarios, it's buying something that hasn't been built yet. So just buying a plan of something that's going to be built. So you're going to get the floor plan and the interior schedule and what it's going to look like, but it might not be built for a few years. So there's so much risk involved in buying off the plan. But it's also applicable where you might buy a property that's half built, mostly built, or it's fully built, it's brand new, but it's still technically off the plan.
Okay.
Because there's something called a plan of subdivision that has to be registered for it to then become not off the plan.
Right, gotcha.
And why you need to know that is just because if you're buying something that's brand new, it's still not subdivided yet, it's out of your control how long that could take, and you can't settle until that happens. And I've just seen rare but real scenarios where that's taken 6 months. Settlement was supposed to be 60 days, and then all of a sudden that buyer's pre-approval is expired.
Yeah, it's like a cascade of other things. Yeah. Okay, so that's the plan of subdivision, which creates the lots that are assigned to that particular area.
Yeah, the boundaries of your title. Yep.
Zoning and overlays, these are quite interesting, and they're very relevant for the overlays in particular for people that are buying near beautiful forests and that sort of stuff. So zoning, what's that?
So zoning is going to categorize that use of land, for example, residential, commercial, industrial, rural. Each state is going to have different categories and different subcategories. And that zoning just gives a broad allowance of like what can be built.
Yeah, you might be able to have a shed there or not on that one, or, whatever the case may be. Business, not a business.
Can you run a factory from here or only a house or, yes. So you can read the zoning of the local area that you're in by just going to the, you can go to the council website or just Google like zoning, the suburb you're looking in, zoning and overlays. Otherwise, my favourite website, landchecker.com.au. I'm not affiliated with them at all, but you've got to pay for it. But when you're buying a property,
you should be affiliated with them.
I should.
Because talk about it a lot. And I love Landchecker for its worth. Yeah, we used it too.
Yeah. It's just good to know, okay, I'm buying into, for example, general residential zone 2. What does that mean? What does that mean for me? And it's especially important here in Victoria, for example, if you're buying into like near a residential growth zone, that area is earmarked for and encourages much higher density development. So it becomes more of a risk.
Yep.
And in a lot of situations, especially buying apartments, it might be in a commercial zone, but a commercial zone that allows accommodation. Just chat to your broker if that introduces any risk around your loan.
What did you say about density and like what's that zonage? Like where if you're buying
residential growth zone.
A residential growth zone.
It could be called something different depending on which state you're in.
That's bad news for the NIMBYs, the not in my backyard people who don't want any development in their backyard.
Well, if you're in that zone, then
the council's basically green lighted it and said, yep, this could be developed.
Yeah, there's still rules around it, but it allows for higher density
apartments
heights.
Or whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, okay. Flood's a big one for lots of parts of Queensland.
Yeah, well, that's overlay.
Yeah, that's overlay. Yeah.
Overlays are then extra planning controls, and within that zoning, you might have certain patches or certain houses which have certain overlays. So, for example, heritage overlay means that you need to get a council permit to do a renovation or extension or changes to the facade in some situations. You might have a vegetation overlay or a landscape overlay where you have to get a permit to remove trees of a certain size. Could be a flood overlay, which identifies land that's subject to flooding. Obviously, you want to know about that, but then you might have to get certain permits to do certain renovations too. So overlays, in a lot of ways, you have to think about it just as an extra restriction on what you could do, or it just removes your overall power of what you can achieve there because you might need council approval to do certain things. Yep.
We have bushfire overlays where we are because we're close to the forest.
Exactly. So you would have certain things that you can and can't do when you're building and renovating, which need to be cognizant of that overlay.
Yeah. There's 2 more things on our list, and both of them involve planning at the front. There's planning scheme and planning permit. Talk to us about these.
Yeah. So councils will have their own defined planning schemes, and that's really their rules around, like, within those overlays, what you need to do. Like, for example, some overlays might say you need to, some zones might say you need a planning permit to construct a new dwelling if the block is less than 300 square meters, but they might not say that in another area. Like, you just need to understand all of the rules. Like, just can be different depending on the council, and they've got their planning schemes which you can go and read if you want to.
No,
a bit of bedtime reading. And then planning permit, this is different to a building permit. I think they often get confused. Planning permit in other states called like DA, development approval, is where you need to go to council to get a permit to do certain things, like we said before, to do an extension, a new build, a renovation, definitely a subdivision. Council need to approve it. That introduces time, complexity, money. Otherwise, a building permit is required when you're doing any kind of structural work or an extension or a new build. You need a building permit flat out.
Yeah.
But council are not like involved in that. They are the record keeper of it. Once you've finished it, you give it to them. Hey,
that comes from the builder or whatever.
Yeah. But the building permit's organised through a private surveyor, and there are, yes, of course, certain rules that you need to do, follow the building regulations, and if there's structural work, you might need engineering, etc. But they're separate. You're not relying on council
planning
approving
permit
it.
Is the council.
Yeah, or DA, development approval is council.
That's council. Building is
permit,
the builder / surveyor.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's a common confusion.
Yeah. Our council has just adopted that. I don't know if you've seen it, that new AI system where you can put in all of your criteria or actually questions based on that. And then you do have to give it your address in order to get the response, but it will tell you with a percentage of certainty how likely you are to need certain approvals.
There you go. Yep.
And it was really, really cool. So we were wanting to put in a carport and whatever. You're like, how far away are you from trees? How deep will you dig? These types of things.
You have to send that to me. I'm curious to have a play
it
with it.
No, it was really cool. And it was super accurate. Like it was like, you don't need one because you're this far away from the house and this far away from the fence and da-da-da-da. It was really cool. And it's really good that councils are adopting that, because anyone that knows what it's like to deal with council is just like, wow.
And if you don't know and you can't interpret the regulations because they can be confusing, trust me, just call them, ask them, have a chat to them. Sometimes they'll be able to say flat out yes or no. A lot of the times they'll say, well, it depends.
Yeah.
And you have to submit an application and we'll assess it. So like I wanted to build my carport a metre forward from my house and it ended up getting rejected.
Right.
Like it's so frustrating. But however, I then added on a butler's pantry and an ensuite and stuff to the side of my house. I didn't need council approval for that.
Interesting.
I just needed a building permit.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So you just don't know.
And the surveyor who you work with too, like that's helping you do work, so they'll be like, oh no, we need a planning permit for this. They should be doing that too.
Yeah, cool.
If you're not sure.
Cool. Well, this is a long list of 51 different things, probably a few extras splashed in there. But we're going to put the full document in the show notes. So if you're listening and you're thinking, I just need to remember all these things before I go and maybe engage and buy a property or something like that, or speak to someone, you'll have the list there, which you can just refer back to. Otherwise, we do mention a lot of these terms throughout episodes on the podcast. If you are in need of a buyer's agent and you're operating here in Victoria, Amy Lunardi is easy to find now because you are on socials, which are blowing up at the time of recording. You're doing super well over there. I watched one of them recently where you did like a house tour of this magnificent home. I think it was like red brick or something. I was like,
it's beautiful.
Yeah, that thing's like I was just like, this is otherworldly for me. But you can get in touch with Amy, amylunardi.com.au, available on socials, buyer's agent here in Victoria. This has been heaps of fun. So thanks for joining me.
Thanks, Owen. See you next time.
Thanks for watching this episode of the podcast. If you want to hear more from us, you can get daily videos and podcasts on Rask's YouTube channel, or if you want to enroll in a free course on investing, property, business, money, you name it, you can join over 34,000 other students and enroll in a free course on the Rask website. Simply head to www.rask.com.au and follow the prompts. Thanks for watching this Rask podcast.